Should you avoid all artificial sweeteners? That's what the World Health Organization says. I'm Dr. Eric Westman, and this is Dr. Westman Reacts. But first, be sure to check out my new pamphlet. It's called 5 Things You Need to Know About Cancer and Metabolic Disease. See it in the link in the description below. There was a recent alarm from the World Health Organization. I mean, this is a globally influential organization that says that the new guideline on non-sugar sweeteners recommends against the use of non-sugar sweeteners to control body weight or reduce the risk of non-communicable diseases. Well, that's a pretty powerful statement. So I wonder, is there new information that has come out? The ideal study which would persuade me is if there was a randomized trial of people who got the non-sugar sweeteners and then those who got sugar and whatever else or not the non-sugar sweeteners. You follow these people over time. You're prospectively following them. Clinical trials generally have very tight monitoring over time. And if there was a difference in this experiment of randomizing people following over time of non-sugar sweeteners, I would be persuaded. I mean, and then if there was one study, you'd want to see another to corroborate it. This is in the context of me advising the use of anything but sugar to get people off of sugar, because sugar in the food and the drinks raises the blood sugar. I mean, I had someone stop using a sugar-sweetened beverage, and in 2 days he came off 180 units of insulin. So because the insulin was treating the blood sugar elevation from the sugar-sweetened beverage. So for someone to say that there's no evidence that sugar causes diabetes or causes a blood sugar elevation, they have no clinical credibility in my mind, because any doctor that has advised cutting out sugar in the drinks will see this effect of lowering the blood sugars. Or you can get a glucose monitor, blood sugar in the finger sticks or on the arm here, and see what happens to your blood sugar after having sugar. So for the last 20 years in research and in a clinical practice at Duke University, have advocated for the use of anything but sugar. So it could be NutraSweet, it could be sucralose, it could be a sugar alcohol, because sugar is so damaging. When the blood sugar goes up, and specifically it's glucose, I know, and sugar is sucrose for the most part, and it gets digested to glucose and fructose. So you can endlessly complicate this, or just call it sugar. So you get the sugar out of the drinks, the blood sugar doesn't go up, and the insulin doesn't have to come up to lower the blood sugar. It's actually a pretty simple system here. And so to have a world organization say, oh, wait, they reviewed the studies, and to see if studies of using these non-sugar sweeteners caused weight loss. And in a meta-analysis, they found that there was no benefit of giving people non-sugar sweeteners as opposed to having them just eat food. Well, I'm aware of this evidence, the evidence that it's like apples and oranges. It has nothing to do with my clinical practice, where I tell people to avoid all sugars. I tell people to avoid apples and bananas and, yes, fruits, because that has sugar in it. And in the context of a diet where you are always telling people to limit sugar in the foods, limiting the sugar in the drinks with non-nutritive or non-sugar, whatever you want to call it, is actually beneficial. And they didn't study any of that. So the problem is, in our studies, going back to 2002, where we recommended using these, we didn't say, here's a low-carb diet plus anything but sugar, alternative sugar sweeteners. So if you're going to do a meta-analysis and search the medical literature, you're not going to find the research that we've done where we let people have these other things. You're not going to be in the clinical setting, because these are clinical trials going through publications that they focused on. So, and you know, the basis of this was that non-sugar sweeteners are not essential dietary factors and have no nutritional value. Well, that's true. And then the recommendation is people should reduce the sweetness of the diet altogether. starting early in life to improve their health. That's Francesco Branca at the World Health Organization. Well, that sounds great, and that sounds so simple, but it's not so simple when you're trying to help people, meeting them where they are, having sugar and sweetness every day. Yes, it's possible to cut that all out, but it's also possible to take people from sugary things to non-sugary sweet things. And I recommend early on things like sugar-free Jell-O with some whipped cream on it as a sweet. That goes a long way if you're looking for something sweet. You're trying to do a low-carb diet, you're just starting, and you're craving something sweet, have something that's a non-sugar sweetener. But this warning really didn't come up. There's no new clinical trial evidence of harm or concern. They also cite some of the what's called nutritional epidemiology. And if you listen to any of my videos going back for years, nutritional epidemiology is where you follow people over time, yes, even hundreds of thousands of people, but you really don't know what they're doing, because you're asking them at one or maybe every year, one time point, or every year or 5 years throughout the study, and what they're eating. And you don't go home with them and ask what they're eating and see what they're eating. You take their word for it. And then you look for health outcomes. And there's so many biases, meaning things that could take you away from the truth. A healthy user bias, generally people will do lots of things together, and you look at one thing in the diet, you can often see what you want to see in nutritional epidemiology. So they also cite the nutritional epidemiology studies here, which I don't think is strong enough evidence for you to make a decision on. It's called evidence generating science, hypothesis generating science, not evidence in an experimental trial, not hypothesis testing science. So I wasn't too impressed with this advisory, but it's gotten into the news in a big way. And here's a report interviewing a doctor, local doctor. So what happens is a news press release will come out, and then a local channel of news typically will find a local doctor to interpret that science for them, to give color commentary to. And so let's see what this doctor says.
In today's Health Alerts, if you are trying to drop a few pounds, you might want to skip sugar substitutes. That's according to the World Health Organization. They are now advising against the use of non-sugar sweeteners for weight control. Our Chief Health Editor, Dr. Parthanani, joined us with the details. And Doc, what is the new recommendation based on, and so which sweeteners are recommended?
Yeah, it's always confusing, right? The World Health Organization analyzed the latest research, which included 283 studies, so a lot. And what they found was that sugar substitutes did not have any long-term benefits when it comes to reducing body fat. When compared to sugar, the sugar substitute had a low impact when it comes to reducing body weight and caloric intake. On top of that,
stopping there, the studies that were done were not low-carb diet studies. So, and I'm familiar with these studies where you let people have low-calorie diets, low-fat diets, or some other calorie-restricted diet, and giving these sweeteners or not, so that people are not prohibited from having other sorts of carbs. So again, it's apples and oranges. Even if you don't have a study to show it, if it's something that we've done for a long period of time, clearly there's benefit from using non-sugar sweeteners. Well, comment in the comments below if you've used non-sugar sweeteners to help your low-carb diet to get off sugar. So, in the fact that it hasn't gotten into the publications, a whole another lecture on where the money comes from and why someone might want to put this information out there. I'm always reminded of since there's no study, it can't be true. Well, had Orville and Wilbur Wright done a research review of should humans fly, they would have concluded and said, no, there's no evidence, there's no study that says humans should fly. So that's, and they're the ones who, did the first powered flight off the North Carolina coast. So there actually is room for coming up with something new beyond what we've seen in the past. And that's also an argument or a criticism of the nutritional epidemiology studies. It's assuming that what's happened in the past is going to necessarily be what happens in the future. So enter in the new science of nutritional ketosis and cutting carbs out. And everyone goes into nutritional ketosis if you don't eat for 2 days. That's our default mechanism, and some argue the primary mechanism of fuel. If you don't eat carbs for 2 days, you'll be in nutritional ketosis. And this might be actually like discovering the first powered flight. So my point is that you can do retrospective and reviews, but you can actually come up with new science as well. And it's a good thing Orville and Wilbur Wright didn't rest on doing research on what publications there had been on flight. But we'll back to the doctor and artificial sweeteners.
On top of that, the systemic review suggests that there could be an increased risk of some serious health issues like type 2 diabetes, bladder cancer, and cardiovascular or heart disease like stroke, high blood pressure. And so the report also noted the possibility of death due to heart disease and early death from any cause. As for which non-sugar sweeteners we should avoid, we were talking about this before, the World Health Organization said that they're including all synthetic and naturally occurring or modified non-nutritive sweeteners that are not classified as sugars. Here are a few common ones that are named. Acetylphenol and aspartame, advantame, cyclamates, neotame, saccharin, sucralose, stevia, and stevia derivatives. So a lot. Now the World Health Organization says its recommendation applies to everyone unless you have pre-existing diabetes.
Okay, so
So what's fascinating is there's sort of a lumping of all of these. They can't possibly all have been studied. And so you're overgeneralizing a bit. But then what about the ones that are newer that haven't made the list? In fact, you could suspect that the company that's making the newest one that doesn't fit the old guideline might be promoting this new guideline because a new item hasn't been studied, so it doesn't make the no-no list or the prohibition list. But these other studies that are looking at association of these sweeteners with health issues like diabetes and cardiovascular disease, to me it's just a confounder. Again, it's not experimental trials looking prospectively. We give half the people something sugar, we give the other half the non-sugar sweetener to see if they get heart attacks and diabetes. No, it's that epidemiology looking back, association, and there's a common phrase you'll hear, association is not causation. But I would say at this time, is there any added benefit of having these to prolong your life? Or would I recommend that you have these and I'm going to stand up and argue for them? No, not at all. I can't see any studies saying if you have sucralose or aspartame, you're going to live longer. But there is a direct benefit of having you avoid sugar. So if you have pre-diabetes, and even then the type 2 diabetes is in there as an exception, which is an interesting addition there right at the end. And so many people have diabetes, and I learned recently that it's so common to have diabetes among truckers now that they took away the prohibition that you can't be a trucker if you're on insulin. You're able to be a trucker now and drive when you're on insulin. Otherwise, we wouldn't have enough truckers to drive. Diabetes and the use of insulin for diabetes has become so common. So I'm all for switching over to the non-sugar sweeteners to get you off sugar. I'm not presented with any new information here to warrant an advisory like this. But let's keep going at 128.
Non-sugar sweeteners are in so many products. So how are people able to cut those out and still get that sweet tooth, take that you need?
And that's what my patients ask me, right? So artificial sweeteners are often found in prepackaged foods and drinks. Some people add them to beverages like tea and coffee. So most are created from chemicals, Brian, except for a few that are made from natural substances like herbs. One big issue with them is that they're high intensity. 200 to 700 times sweeter than regular sugar. So they can have a very powerful effect on our brains, and that leads to increased food cravings. So what can you do? That's the question. The World Health Organization suggests.
Well, so let's stop on that just a moment. If something's really sweet, it will perpetuate your desire for having something sweet. And that is generally true. So, but if you're only allowed the non-sugar sweeteners in the context of a clinical program, you're reversing diabetes, reversing obesity, metabolic syndrome, other metabolic problem, you know you can't cross the line back over to sugar. So again, it's apples and oranges. And in the studies, one of them, I remember, they said if people were allowed the artificial sweeteners, they were more likely to have sugar products too. Well, you see, that's not allowed in our clinical programs. We have a guardrail where the only thing you can have again is the diet soda. So you're contained into the other realm of sweetness, which means you don't get that blood sugar and insulin elevation, which is what we're trying to protect against. So I'm not persuaded that because sweet things make you want more sweet things, that you shouldn't have sweet things. Just stay away from sugar as the sweetener, and you won't get the metabolic effects of the sugar.
That people reduce the sweetness of their diet altogether. To do this, you need to check nutrition labels and select no sugar added foods. However, here's what I tell my patients. The easiest way to avoid sugar substitutes is to get rid of or cut back on processed foods. Instead, choose whole, nutritious foods. I highly recommend fruit as it's naturally sweet and also contains healthy vitamins and fiber. That's important, and antioxidants. And for those with sweet tooth, you can train your taste buds rather, and name your sweet tooth as well. So be sure to eat plenty of vegetables, protein, and foods high in fiber. Together, I think these will fill you up naturally and cut back on your cravings. And that's the idea, to cut back on your food cravings so you don't have, increased fat and increased weight.
So basically, eat healthier.
It is, but it's like pick stuff that's sweet, so you don't have to say I'm not gonna have any sweet stuff. So pick it from fruits
So
and
you still
naturally
get that craving, and then don't go chasing.
and naturally occurring sugars, not the added sugars.
All right, Dr. Nandi, grateful.
Well, I thought that was a pretty good conclusion. Although what is healthy to the commentator or the interviewer, healthy is defined by many different things by many different people, and the idea of just just eat real foods. It doesn't play out well in a clinical practice like mine, where people are coming for help to try to get off all of these foods that they just can't control. And it really has become clear to me that it's the foods that are the problem, not you. If you can't stop eating the food, actually the food has been designed so that you can't stop eating it. So one successful method is cut out all the sugars, and starches have a lot of sugar, so you want to be super low on the starches too. And with this doctor saying just have fruit, you have to be very careful with the amount of fruit if you're doing a keto level carb restricted diet. This is roughly a fistful, a cupful is a fistful. You can compare your fist. If you have a really small one, it might not be a really big one, it might be more. But half a cup is two knuckles, or half the fist, and 1/4 cup is just that one knuckle. A 1/4 cup of fruit or berries has 5 carbs. So some people can have a little bit of fruit and stay in under a 20 or 30 total gram per day carb diet, but many people find that to trigger them. If you have access to a whole thing of strawberries or blueberries, you might consume that whole thing, and you're way over the carb limit. So that you have to burn through all the carbs before your body's going to give up any of its own fat. It's laying in wait, but it's ready to give up its own fat and to put energy into the fire, if you will. But you have to be very strict about limiting the carbs to get that started. So all in all, I thought the advisory is misguided. The interpretation of it locally here was not bad, although at the end I'd still be sort of questioning or wondering how to implement this in my daily life. For you, my patient, don't worry about this one. It's the World Health Organization actually has been biased in many different directions for goodness knows what, probably money. A lot of people have thought that that's probably the agenda for a lot of what comes out of these major organizations. I don't have absolute evidence of that, but that's other people tell me, which would make sense to me then that they're taking very weak evidence and making some sort of proclamation. So don't fear the non-nutritive or the other interesting thing is some people call them artificial when stevia, monk fruit are not artificial. That even confuses. Anything with sugar is fine with me to get you off the sugar. And then what happens for most people over time is that you just don't get the same reward from that sweetness, and you'll get off the sugar or the sweetness over time. But let me know how this has played out in your life in the comments below. If you like this, be sure to like, be sure to subscribe, ring the notification bell, and why not send to a friend who might be concerned about this recent World Health Organization advisory. Hope that's helpful. Until the next time. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, and check out adaptyourlifeacademy.com.